Welcome to Doing Business in Africa. I'm Sue Bierkus and we're here in Uganda, known as the Pearl of Africa. Let's find out what it's like doing business.
Coming up, a look at how Uganda plans to manage its massive oil wells, why the country's flower and tourism sectors are optimistic about the future, and why you should be paying attention to Uganda's property market. We also look at a day in the life of a telecoms investor in Uganda. And finally, Uganda might be a major coffee exporter, but here's one man's quest to get Ugandans drinking their own coffee. In the early 20th century, Britain's World War II Prime Minister Winston Churchill paid a visit to Uganda, and he was so overcome by the natural beauty and resources of the country that he dubbed it the Pearl of Africa. Today in Uganda, you'll find that statement is still true. The country has some of the world's richest mineral and agricultural resources. Over 1,073 bird species and half the world's rare mountain gorillas reside here. Uganda is Africa's largest exporter of Robusta coffee. Not to mention, it is in fact the source of the Nile River. And now Uganda is finally starting to exploit its vast crude oil resources, something which, due to political instability and lack of infrastructure, was not possible before. There are 4 major exploratory companies in the industry. The largest is Irish company Tullow Oil. They've discovered the most oil so far, but it's still early days.
Yeah, we've discovered around about 600 million barrels of resources. That's barrels of oil we think we can produce from the ground. We think there's over 1 billion barrels here in Uganda, and that's sizable. You're given that Uganda produces or needs about 11,000 barrels of oil a day here.
Only exploiting Uganda's oil now is seen by many as a blessing rather than a curse.
I think we've been very lucky. We neither exploited our petroleum or our minerals in the past when we had absolutely no capacity to manage them. We are now in control. As a government, we are in control. We will collect our taxes. We have a strong Uganda Revenue Authority. We will manage our environment. We have a very strong National Environment Management Authority. We will manage standards.
Oil is Uganda's biggest import, amounting to millions of US dollars every year. And so government plans to use the processed field domestically and regionally, as well as help ease some of the power shortages restraining the country's growth. The question being asked now is, can Uganda avoid the resource curse?
Our challenge is how to now put that revenue to use. We think that, and the government has taken a decision that we shall have refineries here. We shall process our oil in the country so that we have the best benefit, not only from the oil itself, but also from the byproducts.
Analysts seem confident that government is managing the legislation and policy process well, and production is expected to start next year.
Well, I think government are being very sensible because as soon as they got the first discoveries of oil, they stopped giving out blocks of land for oil exploration while they took a step back and tried to figure out, ouch, what are we going to do with this oil? How are we going to manage it? And they suspended the tender process until they put into place a proper oil and gas policy. They took advice from that from places like Trinidad and Tobago, from Norway, and eventually, just last year, they actually put into place the oil and gas policy, which is a policy describing how you can give out tenders, describing how much profit sharing the government gets in relation to the turnover of oil.
Security in the north of the country has been a concern for investors, as Joseph Kony's Lord's Resistance Army raged terror there for over 2 decades. But in 2005, the LRA was pushed out of the country, and now Kony and several of his commanders are wanted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court. While the oil reserves bordering the DRC and Uganda could prove a risk, both governments seem committed to securing the area, and investors share the sentiment.
You mentioned my Nigerian days. Security was very much paramount in my mind when I was there. We obviously take security very seriously, but it's assuring to see that Uganda and the DRC, for example, are in discussions, and we would like to think the security remains in our focus, but not the prime area of concern.
So does government see oil as the country's success story?
For us, we have created a very good competing climate for investment. We have in the past emphasized the areas that we need for investment. We have tried as much as possible to create a very good investment climate. In the past 2 or 3 years, we are emphasizing on infrastructure development. So it is not oil, as the emphasis is the investment climate, where you have We have lessened the cost of doing business by registration of business, by licensing, by good taxation rates, by rebates and refunds, and by exemptions, where tax holidays where new investors come in.
Before 1986, Uganda was riddled with instability and experienced a series of coups. But under the leadership of Yoweri Museveni, the country has achieved an 8% economic growth rate for the last 5 years. The IMF says that a drop in remittances, aid inflows, and outflow of funds by portfolio investors will see this growth drop to around 5.5%. But compared with its global counterparts, this isn't too bad and is definitely leaps and bounds better than that first day Museveni stepped into office.
Yeah, in 1986, when we came into government, the economy was in shambles. There was no sector in the economy which was functioning. The export sector had been reduced to coffee alone, but most of it, because of the black market, it was also going on in the black market. We had problems of revenue, government revenue. At that time, the former government was using mostly printing money to run the government. And so because most of the sectors had actually ground to halt, there were no revenues. And so we had to work hard to make sure that we bring back the revenue generating sectors.
For most of the 1980s, Uganda's main export was coffee. But in the 1990s, government started focusing on diversifying from being a monocrop state and attracted investment in other agricultural areas. One of these was floriculture. It was during this time that architect turned floriculture entrepreneur Stanley Mulumba started a flower farm as part of his retirement plan. He thought this would be a quiet time in his life.
Yes, the major shock actually in 2000-2001 was basically the sale or the putting under receivership of most of the original flower growers. I think this was as a result of the bad prices that existed on the market, but also maybe there was a bit of financial mismanagement on some of the growers. But by and large, the industry, when it started in 1993, in East Africa at least, roses were not quite as a large market, especially in Kenya. When the Ugandans came in 93, started off with getting very good prices, the Kenyans also changed, realized that they could get much better money in flowers, and they came in a big way, which in a way flooded the market with flowers. You had also Zimbabwe, of course Israel also came in with a big product. So there was a drastic reduction in prices, and as a result there was a destabilization in the industry, and this led to a lot of farms being sold under receivership.
Then last year, the global financial system imploded, and Ugarose was forced to throw away a large part of its production due to poor demand in Europe. In addition, the company had to delay expansion plans and extend its loan facility. Stanley now is the only 100% indigenous African Ugandan flower farm owner in the country. And after a thorny ride so far, he's surprisingly upbeat about the industry.
I am optimistic because I believe that this crisis is not going to last forever. Maybe even if it goes on for another 2-3 years, as long as we can maintain our farms going, service our loans, pay the workers, and make sure that our gardens are okay, we should be able to look to the future.